Welcome. If you enjoy drifting into the mystery and quiet beauty of lost worlds, ancient temples, sacred rituals, and forgotten cities, you're among friends. Subscribe for more peaceful journeys through time. Now, let's begin. Before the sky bloomed with color, before the warmth of the sun kissed the baked mud bricks of the city, a pale silver light hovered over the sleeping rooftops. The city was still, caught in the breath between night and dawn, when even the gods, it was said, turned their eyes away from the world and allowed it to dream, uninterrupted. The scent of the Tigris drifted through the reed slats of houses, soft and cool. River mist clung to the pathways of packed earth, and silence ruled over the city of though soon the chants of merchants, the clang of bronze, and the lowing of oxen would rise again, ancient and familiar. But for now, all was quiet. Along a narrow path, barely wide enough for two people to pass, a figure moved silently. Sandaled feet made no sound. His robe was coarse linen, dyed the color of storm clouds, and clutched beneath one arm was a wooden tablet case, bound with fraying cord. Lugalenu, temple scribe, walked like a man in prayer, not bowed, but attentive, as though the world whispered to him, and he didn't wish to miss a word. He paused often, not from tiredness, but to look. There, a smear of crushed dates on the step of a merchant's stall. There, the half-finished weaving of a basket left overnight, its rushes splayed like sun rays. A pot cooling beside a window where some mother must have left it, believing the early air would chill it faster. And above, carved into the mud brick wall of a corner home, a simple handprint, small, a child's, and beside it, a thumbprint dipped in white ash. Some kind of game, or magic, or memory. These were the things Lugalenu loved best, not the clamor of trade, nor the proclamations of kings, nor even the rituals of the temple. It was the quiet marks people left without meaning to, a fingerprint, a forgotten bowl, a reed plucked and tucked behind a doorway. These were his stories. He walked on. The temple loomed in the distance, its stepped tower, ziggurat, drenched in shadows. As he approached, the first hint of gold rose over the horizon, catching on the tips of stone and turning the darkness blue. A pair of doves fluttered from the rooftop, wings brushing the air in slow, deliberate rhythm. He paused at the edge of the square, near the statue of a lion with a chipped jaw. The lion had guarded the temple for more than 100 summers. Lugalenu touched its paw lightly in greeting, as he had every morning since he was a boy. The stone was warm already. From somewhere inside the temple walls, a low drum beat once, just once, and faded into silence. A signal that the high priest had risen. The great day would begin. But not yet. Not for a little while. Lugalenu turned instead toward the narrow passage beside the temple, an alley that few entered unless instructed. Here, sacred scrolls were kept in sealed jars, and tablets too worn or cracked for use were laid into shelves like the bones of old prophets. The air was thick with dust and a faint sweetness, like dried figs left in the sun. He unlocked the wooden door with a brass key tied to a loop on his sash. Inside, the archive chamber was dim and cool. Rows of clay tablets lined the walls, each stamped with cuneiform markings in Lugalenu's hand, or one like it. Some told of grain tallies and trade agreements. Others recounted the dreams of kings or the patterns of the stars. But most were stories, prayers, myths, fables told at night to quiet children and stir the hearts of grown men. Lugalenu took a lamp from its hook and lit it with flint. The soft flicker filled the room with amber light. He walked to his workbench and set down the case. He had dreamt again. Not all dreams were worthy of clay. Many were fleeting shadows, echoes of wine, hunger, or fear. But some lingered like footprints in wet earth. They asked to be remembered. In the dream, a woman had stood in the river. She wore robes of silver-threaded blue, and her eyes were made of polished stone. She did not speak, but her hand had pointed downward, into the depths, and there Lugalenu had seen something. Not clearly, a tablet maybe, or a city beneath the river's bed, or a story too old for words. He took up a fresh slab of clay and pressed it flat. The cool surface yielded to his fingers. The stylus hovered, but he did not write. Not yet. Instead, he sat still, listening. The morning sounds were beginning now. A boy's shout in the distance, the bleat of a goat, the scrape of a broom across stone. The city was waking. But within the archive, time slowed. Here, it always did. He dipped a finger into the water jar and smoothed the clay again. Outside, the temple bells began their song, low, bronze, shimmering like sunlight on the river. Footsteps echoed across the courtyard. Somewhere above, incense curled from a brazier, its scent, cedar and myrrh, slipping through the air like a memory. He thought of the river goddess from his dream again, her silence, her eyes, the sense that she was waiting. Lugalenu pressed the stylus into the clay. Slowly, he wrote, "In the year of the third flood, beneath the waning moon, when barley was stored in stone jars, and men spoke to the gods without fear, there was a city." His hand moved with a rhythm older than thought. The characters formed like reeds along the riverbank, natural, quiet, inevitable. He did not know yet what the story would be. That wasn't how it worked. The story knew itself. He was only its keeper. When the tablet was full, he set it gently on the drying rack beside others. Some bore the signs of age already, hairline cracks, softened corners, but he trusted the temple firekeepers to harden them soon. He stepped outside, blinking against the light. The sun was up now, casting long shadows from the ziggurats' tiers. The priestesses had begun their sweep of the courtyard, scattering flower petals and singing in a language even Lugalenu barely understood. Not because it was foreign, but because it was old. Too old, like trying to remember a lullaby from before your own birth. He made his way slowly to the edge of the sacred pool. The water shimmered with reflections, sky, temple, trees. He knelt and touched it, not to wash, but simply to feel. It was cool and smooth and patient. Voices called from beyond the gate. The city was in full motion now. But here, in this hidden place between time and duty, Lugalenu lingered. A small girl, no more than 7, approached. She wore a simple dress of flax and held a clay figurine, one of the protective spirits often placed in doorways. She peered up at him. "Are you the man who writes the dreams?" Lugalenu smiled softly. "Sometimes. My mother says the gods send dreams when they miss us." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "Your mother is wise." She seemed satisfied with this and ran off again, her figurine bouncing in her hand. He watched her go. A breeze moved through the reeds near the temple wall. It made a sound like whispering silk. Somewhere in the distance, someone laughed. A rich, full sound that bounced between stone homes like a game of catch. The city was alive. Lugalenu stood. He would return to the archive soon. There were more dreams to write, more memories to shape. But for now, he let the sunlight warm his skin and the scent of the sacred pool drift into his breath. The day had begun. The story would wait. The sun had passed its highest mark and was beginning its slow descent by the time Lugalenu returned to the ziggurat. Shadows stretched longer now, their edges melting into the cool stone walkways. The city around the temple quieted in the heat. Market stalls drawn shut, oxen tethered under shade. and people napping behind reed curtains as the golden afternoon light drifted like honey across mud brick walls. The scent of baked clay and warm barley hung heavy in the air, mingled with the tang of copper dust. Bees hummed near a fig tree in the temple courtyard. The silence was thick and soft, like wool. Lugalenu walked along the northern passage of the ziggurat, the side rarely touched by sun. It was cooler here. The walls were etched with old carvings, scenes of worship and offerings, animals in profile, rows of worshippers bringing dates, fish and vessels of oil to gods whose faces had long eroded. The images blended with patches of moss and the faint mineral sheen that appeared only after the longest summers. He traced a hand across the surface, letting his fingers fall into the tiny grooves of ancient stone. These figures were older than his grandfather's grandfather, older even than the founding of Ur, or so the priests said. They had been brought from an earlier city, swallowed by the river and time. It was here, in this quiet corridor of shade and echoes, that he first noticed the crack in the wall. Not just any crack. This was low and deliberate, just behind a row of crumbling urns filled with old offerings. Lugalenu had passed this spot hundreds of times, but today something was different. A single shaft of light, angled perfectly, had found the crack, casting a tiny golden gleam inside. He knelt. Brushing aside the fine layer of dust, he ran a finger along the edge. The crack wasn't in the wall itself, but in an old clay jar set against it, one used long ago for storing broken tablets. It had split open just enough to reveal the edge of something inside. Not rubble, not discarded fragments, a full tablet. He reached in slowly and drew it out. The clay was darker than usual, a deep reddish brown like dried blood. Its texture was rough, uneven, hand-shaped but never fired. It must have been hidden for centuries, maybe longer. Strange, Lugalenu thought. All temple tablets were hardened in flame to preserve them, but this one had been left soft, fragile. It trembled slightly as he held it, and he moved quickly to a nearby alcove to lay it gently on a woven mat. For a long while he did not try to read it. He only sat beside it, the stone wall cool behind him, and listened to the silence of the corridor. A single fly buzzed near the urns, then disappeared. Somewhere deeper within the ziggurat, a soft footfall echoed and faded. A bird called once from the roof, and was silent. Finally, he leaned forward. The writing was unlike any he had seen, not because it used different signs. The symbols were familiar, even simple, but because of the rhythm. It was wrong, or rather, it was older, stiffer, more fluid at the same time, like someone had written in his language, but with a voice trained elsewhere. The phrasing struck chords in him he couldn't name, like hearing a lullaby that makes your eyes wet, though you've never known the tune. The words formed a partial verse. When the river ran backward and the sky wore no name, she stepped from the mouth of the clay and sang the first story. But men forgot, and the clay hardened. He blinked. A strange thrill passed through him, though the air remained still. The hairs on his arms stirred slightly, as if touched by wind that wasn't there. He read the lines again. This was not myth as he knew it, not one of the familiar tales told during feasts or rituals. This was older, quieter, and hidden. For a reason? He set the tablet back with care. Later, in the scribe's chamber, he approached the high priest with the discovery. The chamber was thick with smoke and muttered prayers. Incense curled in slow, lazy ribbons around the room, and stone lamps flickered low near the walls. The high priest, a man of great age with brows like wings of snow, listened, but did not look up. "You found it in the jars?" he said, voice like dry papyrus. "Yes," Lugalenu said. behind the northern wall. There is nothing behind that wall. There was a crack, and a jar, and this. He extended the tablet, wrapped in linen now for protection. The high priest sniffed. A mistake, or someone's childish invention. Discard it. Lugalenu hesitated. But the verse speaks of the first story, a voice from the clay, a goddess perhaps. The form is unfamiliar. The old man finally turned his head. His eyes were sharp beneath the cloud of age. There are many stories. Most are lost for good reason. Do not dig into what was buried. He turned away again, returning to his scroll. Lugalenu bowed and left. Outside, the air had cooled slightly. The wind carried the breath of coming dusk. He tucked the tablet back into his satchel, wrapping it once more, though gently. He would not write more about it. Not in the temple records, not yet. But he would not forget. That night, Lugalenu did not sleep in his chamber. He took a reed mat and his tablet, and walked to the edge of the city, beyond the barley fields, where the old canal met the river. This was where the fishermen made camp during dry seasons, and where children played in the silt when the water ran low. Now it was empty, quiet. The moon had risen, full and pale, casting soft light over the reeds. Crickets whispered in the darkness. Frogs made lazy music near the water's edge. The stars above were scattered like sand across a black tablet. Sharp, endless, old. He lay on his back, the tablet at his side. He waited. No voice spoke. No vision came. But the stillness was deep and good. The kind that holds you gently until your thoughts slow and drift, like bits of straw floating on the river's skin. Eventually, he did dream. In the dream, he stood again in the river. But this time, the sky was different. It swirled with color. Not clouds, but something older, moving slowly in arcs and patterns like language written on air. A woman stood on the water's surface, weightless. Her hair floated as if underwater, though no wind stirred it. Her hands were outstretched, palms open. Her eyes were like polished lapis, full of patience. Her mouth did not move, but her voice filled the space between them. "You heard," she said. Lugalenu did not answer. He only looked. "You read what was meant to remain," she said again. He felt no fear, only quiet. But the story was not meant to be forgotten, not by all, not forever. Then the river glowed from beneath, and the woman began to sink, not drowning, but returning, slowly, as if to a cradle. Her body turned to mist, then to shadow, then to nothing. When he woke, the stars had shifted. A pale band of light touched the horizon. Birds stirred in the reeds. He sat up slowly. The tablet was still beside him, unbroken. He placed a hand on it and whispered, "Nin Meli." The name had come unbidden, like a breath. He did not know where it came from. He stood, gathered his mat, and returned to the city. As he passed the city gate, an old man sweeping the dust paused to look at him. "You walk with dreams in your eyes," the old man said softly. "Careful they do not walk you into the deep." Lugalenu bowed politely, but said nothing. The city awoke slowly. Smoke from morning fires rose again. Water jugs were lifted. Livestock groaned. And above it all, the ziggurat caught the first rays of sun, lighting the ancient stones gold. Lugalenu walked back into its shadow, the story beginning to form inside him, soft, slow, and ancient as the clay itself. The third evening after the dream passed in silence. The sun had set behind the western wall, and with it went the heat of the day. In its place came a breeze from the river, cool, damp, and laced with the scent of silt and crushed reeds. The temple drums had long since ceased. and the fires in the upper chambers had been left to smolder into ash. The sounds of the city narrowed to a trickle, a murmured lullaby, the splash of water poured from a jar, the low murmur of neighbors trading final words before sleep. Lugalenu sat by the shallow window of his chamber, his knees drawn to his chest, a tablet balanced across his thighs. But he did not write, not tonight. Instead, he stared out at the darkened courtyard, where shadows moved like slow birds through the columns. He had tried to push the memory of the dream away, tried to sweep the name Ninmeli into the corners of his mind, behind grain tallies and prayer fragments. But it did not leave. It pressed gently at the back of his thoughts, like the rhythm of footsteps behind you that vanish when you turn around. The feeling was not frightening. It was like homesickness for a place he had never lived, or longing for a song he'd only ever heard. Once, long ago, through a door half open. The tablet he had found remained hidden beneath his sleeping mat, wrapped in linen, wrapped again in doubt. No one asked about it. No one noticed. But the words clung to him. In the candle's flicker, he read again the short verse he had copied onto a fresh slab. When the river ran backward and the sky wore no name, he mouthed it silently. Something in him stirred. That night, he left the temple. Not in secrecy, not with haste. He moved slowly, as if in ritual. Down the stairwell, across the eastern courtyard, past the carved bull gate that marked the limit of the sacred precinct. He nodded to the guards, who paid him no mind. A scribe often left after dusk, to deliver omens, to transcribe dreams, to listen in places the gods might whisper. But tonight he walked not toward the city, nor to the homes of nobles. He walked toward the marshes. The edge of ended where the firm paths gave way to water. There, the world softened. The city's straight lines and carved edges blurred into reeds and slow currents and fields of mud that swallowed sandals whole. It was a place of quiet trades and forgotten men. The fishers lived there, the dye makers, the ones who painted their boats with stories and sang to their nets. And beyond them, further still, lived the old scribes. There were 4 of them, maybe 5. No one knew for sure. They lived not in homes, but in huts made of woven reed and driftwood, half sunken into the muck. They wrote on clay so old it cracked as it dried, and they spoke in syllables no one else used anymore. It was said they remembered things no one else dared to. Lugalenu had only met one of them once, when he was young, an old woman with eyes like flint and skin so thin it seemed carved. She had come to the temple to return a stolen tablet. She had not bowed. She had not spoken. She had only handed the wrapped slab to the priests and walked away again. He remembered thinking she looked like a tree that had pulled up its own roots and gone wandering. He did not know her name. He hoped to find her. The night was full of small sounds, water lapping, the occasional slap of a frog leaping into the shallows. Insects sang in delicate tones, sometimes in rhythm, sometimes in question. Lugalenu followed the moonlight along the narrow ridges between flooded fields. Dragonflies hovered around him. Reeds leaned, whispering things to each other that no man could understand. It was an hour's walk before he saw a faint flicker ahead, lamplight, low and orange, drifting between woven screens. The hut was little more than a dome of reeds, stitched with bits of linen and twine. Outside, drying fish hung from a line. A small clay firepot glowed at the center, and beside it sat the woman. She did not look up. Lugalenu stopped a few paces away. "Forgive the intrusion," he said softly. "I come with questions." Still she did not look. Her hands were shaping a lump of clay, slow and careful. He waited. Finally, she spoke. "You are the one who heard her voice." His throat tightened. Yes, he said. The woman pressed a line into the clay with a dull stick. You dreamt of the goddess. Yes. And now you wonder if you were chosen. He hesitated. I don't know. I only want to understand. Understanding is dangerous, she said, especially for scribes. You write things down, you make them stay. I want to remember, he said, the story. Nin Meli. At that, she looked up. Her face was lined like river silt after a flood. Her eyes were dark and round and still. No one has spoken her name aloud in 100 generations, she said. He waited. She set the clay aside and reached behind her into a sack. From it she pulled a thin, long object, wood, dark and smooth, curved slightly at one end. It was a stylus, ancient. He recognized it at once. She held it out. He took it. You will not find the story in the temple, she said. They burned most of it. What remains lives in pieces, in marsh songs and carvings, in the dreams of those who listen. But if you want the whole, you must write it yourself. But I don't know it. You don't need to. You only need to open the clay, let it speak. He nodded. She reached into the firepot and pulled out a tiny blackened figure. It was no taller than his hand, shaped like a woman, seated cross-legged, with lines for eyes and coils for hair. She was the first scribe, the woman said, before kings, before priests. She wrote the world into motion. Her name was erased because she wrote stories that healed instead of ruled, that softened instead of conquered. Nin Meli. The woman nodded once. Her story was not lost, she said, only hidden, buried in those who still dream. Lugalenu sat beside the fire. They did not speak again. When the fire had burned down to embers, he stood and bowed. She handed him a pouch of wet clay, already pressed flat. Write only at night, she said. The day will not protect you. He returned to the city just before dawn. The guards were changing shifts. No one noticed him. He walked with bare feet through the temple's stone halls, carrying the clay beneath his robe. Back in his chamber, he laid the tablet out and smoothed its surface. The stars had not yet vanished. The city still slept. He dipped the old stylus into water and pressed it gently into the clay. He did not think of words. He thought only of the river, of dreams, of the goddess who watched without speaking. And slowly, lines appeared. The river moved like a sleeping breath, wide, slow, and quiet as thought. Lugalenu sat in the center of a reed boat, legs crossed, hands resting on his knees. He wore a plain tunic, damp at the hem, and over his shoulders was a thin wool shawl borrowed from one of the temple attendants who hadn't asked questions. The clay tablet, still soft, was tucked carefully into a satchel at his side, wrapped in linen and placed among dried rushes to keep it from cracking. It had become a part of him now, like a memory he hadn't lived. He didn't know how the boat had come to him. He remembered walking, sandals in hand, past the last rows of houses at the edge of Ur, until stone gave way to wet ground and the smell of river things, moss, fish, bark, mist. Then he saw it, moored loosely beneath a tree, floating half in the reeds, as if waiting. No one was near. No name was carved into its prow. He untied it and stepped inside. Now, in the deep blue light before sunrise, the boat glided forward with no effort. He did not row. He did not steer. The water carried him without question, without sound. The air was thick with moisture, and his skin shone with it, as if the river were breathing through him. Mist curled along the surface. Occasionally a frog croaked, or a bird called sleepily from a branch. But mostly it was silence. To either side, reeds rose like whispering sentinels, brushing one another, sometimes leaning down to touch the water's face. Small insects hovered in the air, blinking faintly like embers that had forgotten they were fire. He closed his eyes. The boat moved on. He began to feel as though the river was not a place, but a memory. A long, slow thought that had existed before names were given to things. He did not know how long he floated. Minutes, hours, days. Time bent in this place. It had no edges. At some point, he opened his eyes again, and the world had changed. The stars were visible now, clear and close, as if they had drawn nearer to see him better. The sky was a rich, dark blue, but it held no moon. Instead, a soft glow rose from the water itself, faint and silver, like the reflection of a torch you cannot see. Then he saw her. She stood at the bow of the boat, barefoot, silent, her robe hanging like mist from her shoulders. It was the woman from the dream. Her face was not young or old. It held no lines, but it carried the weight of many seasons. Her eyes glowed faintly, not like fire, but like polished river stones. She looked at him as if he were not a man, but a word waiting to be spoken. He bowed his head without thinking. Still, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she reached into the folds of her robe and drew out a stylus, not one of wood or bronze, but of bone, pale and smooth. She held it toward him, and he accepted it without question. Its weight was nearly nothing, yet it felt vast. He looked up to thank her, but she was gone. The boat had stopped. Around him now rose the shapes of stone and root, half sunken into the shallows. Walls leaned inward, barely visible beneath vines and earth. Pillars jutted like broken teeth. He had drifted into the ruins of a temple, long drowned, long forgotten. The reeds gave way to still water, and the water gave way to silence. He stepped out of the boat. His feet sank slightly into the riverbed, soft and cold. He moved slowly through the submerged stones, hands outstretched. Fish flickered past his legs. Something moved in the dark. Not dangerous, not curious, simply present. There, in the center of the ruin, stood an altar. It was carved from black stone veined with white. Upon it lay a slab of clay, ancient, untouched, smooth as skin. It pulsed faintly with light, though no fire burned. He approached. The bone stylus grew warm in his hand. He did not write, not yet. Instead, he closed his eyes. The voice came from within him, but also from the stone. It was not loud. It was barely sound at all, more a shape of meaning, like water forming words. "You remember me now," it said. He nodded. "You heard the fragments," the voice said. "Now you must hold the whole." He touched the clay. Images filled his mind, flashes of a time before memory. Trees growing in spirals, rivers without banks, the first hands pressing lines into clay, not to count or command, but to comfort, to remind. He saw Ninmeli, seated beneath a tree, singing to a circle of children. He saw her writing stories into the mud by moonlight. He saw her words glowing, not with power, but with peace. Then, fires. Then, the kings. They did not want stories of healing. They wanted stories of fear, stories that ended in obedience. They called her a heretic. They shattered her tablets. They wrote her name backward and buried it. But some remembered. Lugalenu felt tears sliding down his cheeks. He pressed the stylus into the clay. He did not think. He did not know the words. They came anyway. When the sky wore no name and the land had no master, she came forth from the riverbed. She wrote not to rule, but to listen. She made the first stories of the heart. The clay received the words. As he wrote, the world around him shifted. The water grew warm. Light rose from the riverbed, gold and soft, like dawn filtered through linen. The stones seemed to breathe. Then, gently, the river began to rise. He did not move to leave. He did not panic. He knew this was not destruction. It was remembering. The water lifted him, slowly, until he floated just above the altar, the tablet held to his chest. The bone stylus dissolved in his hand like salt. And then, stillness. No sound, no time. Only the sense of being held. When he opened his eyes, the boat was drifting once more. The temple was gone. The reeds were back. The sky was pale with approaching day. He sat very still, the tablet in his lap, now dry and light. The words were etched deep. He did not remember writing them. He only knew they were true. The river curved gently, and soon the first rooftops of came into view. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Children ran across rooftops, chasing each other with rush dolls. A dog barked. The boat touched against the shore. He stepped out, sandals squelching in the mud, and walked quietly back toward the temple. No one stopped him. The city moved around him like a dream in which he was both present and unseen. He entered the archive chamber just as the bells sounded the morning prayer. He placed the tablet gently among the shelves. He did not label it. He did not sign it. It would be found when the time was right. He sat down at his workbench, took a blank tablet, and began copying a record of barley shipments from the Western Canal. Outside, the sun rose. Inside, the silence held something new, a warmth, a quiet joy, as if the stones themselves had taken a long breath. The story had returned, and it was enough. The days moved forward, slow and golden, like syrup from a fig tree. In the city of the air began to cool as the season turned. The wind from the north carried with it the scent of dry reeds and crushed pomegranates, and the people began to speak of the coming rains. Not with fear, but with the hush of reverence. Change would come, but gently, as it always had. The river shrank slightly in the afternoons, its edges turning to soft mud as it waited for the sky to pour its memory back into it. Birds walked among the shallows now. Boys waded in up to their knees, searching for frogs and lost coins, their laughter echoing between homes. In the temple, the firekeepers began to wear heavier robes at night. Lamps were lit earlier in the day. The ziggurat cast longer shadows, and incense burned slower in the cooler air, curling thick and low to the ground like morning mist. The priestesses sang with a different tone, less brightness, more depth, as if drawing sound from a deeper place inside the stone. Lugalenu returned to his routine. Each morning, he walked from his chamber to the archive. He greeted the same acacia tree at the edge of the courtyard, where a dove now perched with familiarity. He passed the lion statue, still missing part of its jaw, and touched its paw with silent thanks. He entered the stone chamber, where the air always held the same weight, cool, dry, expectant. He copied receipts. He translated merchant requests. He reviewed lunar charts and wrote down the dreams of the temple servants, which arrived in trickles. A fish that whispered a secret, a staircase that led to the stars, a bowl of water that refused to spill. He wrote them all, just as before. But something in him had changed. It wasn't loud, like revelation. It was quiet, like belonging. He no longer thought of the hidden tablet every hour. He no longer woke with her name echoing in his mind. But the feeling had not gone. It had simply settled, deep within him, like a smooth stone at the bottom of a well. Sometimes, when he passed the shelves, his eyes would drift to the corner where he had placed it, the tablet written in trance, in memory, in dream. It sat unmarked, nestled among records of field boundaries and harvest dates. No one had moved it. No one had asked. And that, he thought, was right. Not all stories were meant to be passed from mouth to mouth. Some were meant to rest, to live quietly, to wait for the one who needed them most to find them at just the right time. One evening, after the last bell had rung and the sun had dipped behind the horizon in a rust-colored hush, Lugalenu sat at the edge of the temple roof. From here, he could see nearly everything: the marketplace winding into its quiet, the small oil lamps flickering behind window slats, the shadowed bulk of the river stretching east like a sleeping beast. The stars had begun to appear one by one, shy at first, then bold. They took their usual shapes, but he no longer read them with urgency. He looked at them simply as light from far away, old, soft, patient. Below, the city moved in gentle rhythm. A woman lit a lantern. A child recited a prayer to the moon. Somewhere near the west gate, someone played a wooden flute, the melody slow and uneven, as if the wind itself were learning to sing. He felt no need to speak, not even to himself. The quiet held him. A whisper of a voice drifted into memory, not aloud, but inside him. She wrote not to rule, but to listen. Lugalenu closed his eyes. He could still see the river. He could still feel the warmth of the glowing clay, the weightless boat, the submerged altar ringed with fish and starlight. But he did not need to return there. He had brought that silence with him. It had folded into his breath. In the distance, a bell rang once, softly, the priests marking the last hour of light. Behind him, footsteps echoed. He turned to see the youngest of the temple scribes, Mekar, no more than 12, thin and curious, his hands always smudged with ink. The boy approached shyly, holding a small clay tablet with half-formed markings. His eyes were wide, nervous. "I don't know how to end it," the boy said. Lugalenu took the tablet and read. It was a story of a white bird that couldn't fly, who spoke to trees and waited for the wind to carry it home. The last line trailed off after and then the sky. He smiled. "The sky doesn't always need to answer," he said. "Sometimes just reaching it is enough." The boy nodded slowly. "But what if it wants to keep going?" "Then let it, but gently. Let it drift." He handed the tablet back. The boy sat beside him without speaking. They watched the lights in the city flicker, dim, and finally fade, until the only glow left came from the stars above and the temple fire burning below. Lugalenu placed a hand on the stone ledge. It was still warm from the day. He felt calm, whole. Later that night, he dreamed again. But this time, there was no goddess, no visions, no submerged temple. Only a field of clay, wide and flat, stretching into the distance beneath a sky of deep indigo. Across the clay walked countless figures, young and old, women and men, hands stained with earth, each holding a stylus. Some wrote, some read, some simply watched. He walked among them. No one looked his way. They had their stories. He had his. He found a spot near the edge of the field, smoothed a small patch of clay with his palm, and began to write, not with urgency, not with fear, but with a steady hand and a quiet heart. The words came without effort. The city breathed. The river listened. And in the stillness between them, stories fell like dust and took root like seeds. When he awoke, the sun was rising. The light entered his room in soft stripes, casting long shadows from the shelf of tablets. He rose slowly. He stretched, drank water, and walked barefoot across the room. At the threshold, he paused. Outside, the dove cooed from the acacia branch. The temple bells chimed the first hour of the day, and somewhere, in the shelves of the archive, a single tablet sat wrapped in linen, waiting for someone. Not today, not tomorrow, but one day. to lift it from the dust and begin reading. The story would be there, and it would know how to begin again.